Good morning. I'm always baffled by my namesake, Peter the Rock, who seems anything but sturdy or solid. Today's gospel is no exception. He's whiny, dramatic, and impulsive. He complains about having worked all night and caught nothing. He freaks out when he realizes there's clearly something going on with this Jesus dude. And then he leaves his entire livelihood behind in order to follow this miracle worker he just met. Instead of Petrus, his original name of Simon, Shimon, or one who listens, seems to fit him much better. Shimon as in Shema Yisrael. Simon Peter is great at listening. He does exactly what Jesus asks of him every time he's asked. On the flip side, he also listens a lot to the common cultural understanding of who the Messiah should be, which ends up getting Peter in a lot of trouble with Jesus in later chapters. But regardless of that fact, Simon Peter is remarkable for the way in which he wholeheartedly responds to Jesus' call and devotes himself to trusting Jesus' message. Jesus shows Peter and everyone else gathered there on this day that if they trust in God and what God asks of them, then they will see great abundance. But Jesus also asks Peter to walk away from that abundance, making it clear that the abundance is not the point. Peter is asked to leave it all behind in pursuit of Jesus, and he follows immediately, without hesitation. Like I said, he's so unrock-like. And yet, I'm also in awe of him and humbled by him. Simon, the one who listens to Jesus and trusts so fully in the abundance of the Christ that he walks away from the biggest catch of fish he'd ever seen. At the moment when he could have gone home and shown off how successful he suddenly was, maybe bought a bigger boat, become even more successful as a fisherman, he left it all behind him and walked away. I'm not sure I have that faith in God's abundance. And it leaves me wondering what I'm holding on to too closely in order to be able to listen as well as Simon. Not too long ago, I was asked by a friend to take them to Costco. Costco, if you don't know, is a great place to buy gift cards. You can often save money by buying gift cards for less money than they're worth, which is the exception to the norm of the capitalist racket that is the gift card industry. But anyway, he wanted to come to Costco so that he could buy hundreds of dollars of gift cards to See's Candies to be able to give them as gifts to all his nieces and nephews for their birthdays over the coming year. And as we were about to check out, I wasn't sure how the Costco membership card thing worked and wasn't sure whether he was going to be able to use his credit card to purchase them because of the way Costco scans your membership at checkout. It's complicated. So I offered to have him pay me back on Venmo, to which he said he preferred to pay by credit card because he didn't have the money for it now and would have to wait for his next paycheck to be able to pay it off. And right then and there, I was a bit dumbfounded. On the one hand, this seemed like simply unwise overspending. But on the other, this seemed exactly like the lavish trust in God's abundance that I so lacked, even though my bank account should have felt a lot more abundant in that moment than it did to me, since I wasn't the one living paycheck to paycheck. I'm still not sure exactly how to think about it. But I share it with you today because I find it to be a striking example of what's going on here in the gospel reading, of Peter's trust in God's abundance and his willingness to give it all away. This seems to be exactly what Jesus is looking for in Peter, despite it seeming so unlike a sturdy foundation, such as a rock. The gospel that Jesus shares with Peter and his other followers, the good news of God's kingdom, includes testimony to the fact that God's kingdom is one of overflowing abundance. As with Peter, who casts his net into the water one more time, despite all signs to the futility of this action. Those who listen to Christ's calling in their lives often find themselves overflowing with abundance. But the abundance is part of God's revelation. It is not a reward. Abundance is not a prize or a trophy reserved for those following Jesus. It is a part of God's revelation of who Jesus is and what God's kingdom looks like. It's not the abundance itself that is the end goal, but rather how it points to a deeper call to trust Jesus completely and step into this new identity and purpose. When the abundance comes, Simon doesn't cling to his astounding catch or take credit for it. He doesn't even pause to rejoice at it. Instead, he's overwhelmed by the presence of God, falling to his knees and confessing his unworthiness. The presence of abundance doesn't make him cling to the fish. It causes him to perceive the holiness and grace of Jesus. Instead of taking all his fish to the market, he leaves it all behind because he comes to realize that he doesn't want to miss this opportunity to come close to and follow this man named Jesus. The overwhelming catch of fish shows us that God's blessings in our lives, whether material or spiritual, are not meant to secure us in comfort, but to reveal God's presence and invite us to greater trust and surrender. Additionally, this abundance is not only revelation, but also a foretaste of God's kingdom that we can experience here and now. The overflowing nets full of fish are a sign of the future abundance in Christ that we all are invited to experience, where there is always more than enough for all. The disciples, like Peter, are not called to hoard this abundance or build their identity around it, but rather to proclaim and share this kingdom with others. Peter, like the rest of the disciples, recognizes that the true abundance of life is found not in the gift, but the giver. And so he doesn't let this opportunity to follow Jesus slip by. There's a lot of similarity here with the Buddhist ideas of non-attachment. Jesus calls us to live in a paradox, to receive God's abundance with gratitude while holding it loosely, always ready to leave it behind for the sake of the kingdom. This Christian practice of detachment allows us to enjoy God's gifts without becoming enslaved by them. In the year 2025, we sadly do not need to look far to see examples of what it looks like for Christians to miss the message entirely and choose to become completely attached to the material wealth and power that has been given them. We don't have to ask what it would look like for Peter to have made the other choice and to have hoarded the enormous catch of fish for his own purposes and to have done his best to get rich off of his good fortunes, because that plot line is being played out on the national scene on the daily. Let me say again that abundance is God's revelation, not God's reward. Those who seek abundance only for themselves as some kind of holy compensation, clinging to wealth, power, and control at the expense of others, have entirely missed the point of the gospel. God's abundance is given freely, and it is meant to overflow the nets that were meant to contain it. Those who respond by making bigger nets, building bigger barns in another gospel story, perhaps bigger data centers in today's world, or bigger Rivieras, have missed the point of the gospel narrative. The invitation is not to capture and store the abundance, but to leave it all behind and trust in God's provision for something even greater than you've ever seen, because it's more expansive and generous than anything this world has yet produced. Unlike the abundance of empire, which seeks to hoard, weaponize, and establish dominance on the basis of that abundance, and is ultimately directed inward towards itself. The abundance that Christ invites us all toward is one in which we are all led towards others, away from a focus on the self, and toward the work of justice and love. So may we all, here in this room and across our nation, seek to follow Peter's example of trusting God so deeply that we become willing to give away the abundance given us for Christ's sake.